Christ according to Matthew. 6 days after Peter had acknowledged Jesus as the Christ, the Son of the living God, Jesus took with him Peter and James and his brother John and led them up a high mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his face shone like the sun, and his clothes became dazzling white. Suddenly there appeared to them Moses and Elijah talking with him. Then Peter said to Jesus, "Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, I will make 3 dwellings here, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." While he was still speaking, suddenly a bright cloud overshadowed them, and from the cloud a voice said, "This is my Son, the beloved, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him." When the disciples heard this, they fell to the ground and were overcome with fear. But Jesus came and touched them, saying, "Get up and do not be afraid." And when they looked up, they saw no one except Jesus alone. As they were coming down the mountain, Jesus ordered them, "Tell no one about the vision until the Son of Man has been raised from the dead." The Gospel of the Lord. How do you recognize when you are in the presence of holiness? It's rather easy when, like Peter, you have climbed a high mountain and you see Jesus transfigured before your very eyes. Jesus' face shines like the sun, and his clothes are dazzling white. And Moses and Elijah appear, and a bright cloud overshadows them, with a voice from the cloud proclaiming, "Jesus, my Son, the beloved." And how could Moses have missed that he was in the presence of holiness when he was summoned by God to come up to the mountain where he would receive commandments on tablets of stone? While on the mountaintop, the glory of the Lord took the form of a cloud and then became like a devouring fire. Moses spent the next 40 days and 40 nights atop the mountain, relishing the experience. I've been fortunate enough to have had a few mountaintop experiences over the course of my life. A few times when I was quite literally atop majestic mountains. Maybe you too have known times when the presence of the divine was unmistakable. So real that you could feel God's presence in your bones. Taste the reality of God on your tongue. Bright, dazzling, thunderous, fearful experiences that you never want to end. Like Peter, I've wanted to make dwellings and stay a while in the midst of what seemed so good. But by their very nature, mystical experiences are few and fleeting. And while it's possible to look back on them with fondness and hold them with cherished memories, it's always necessary to come back down the mountain, to return to the mundane, to the ordinary world of buying groceries, caring for your grandchildren, going to the gym, or tending your garden. We have to let go of the supremely holy. Or do we? What if it's possible to sense the presence of the holy, to find that sense of awe without climbing to a mountain summit? What if the peak experiences that shape us, the ones that shape us the most, can be found in the more tranquil valleys where we spend most of our time? It's hard to imagine a less majestic setting for a mountaintop experience than most nursing homes. One Sunday a few years ago, a group of parishioners joined me for a visit to a rather typical nursing and rehab facility to hold a worship service, sing some old hymns, and maybe provide a little cheer for a rather cheerless environment. There was a sense of neglect to the place, evident not just in the worn linoleum floors, the shabby furniture, or the flickering fluorescent light bulbs. but in the sad eyes of the residents. Eyes that tell stories of families who seldom visit and friends who have forgotten them. The residents looked like they were enjoying the hymn singing. Nobody seemed to recognize the Nicene Creed. They sat silently through most of the prayers, although I noticed a few folks moving their lips along with the Our Father. My short sermon got some amens and hallelujahs, more than I'm accustomed to, although I think those were mostly the voices of the choir members that came with me. I did notice that whenever I said something about God's love, one wheelchair-bound resident would loudly exclaim, "I just love everybody." I took that as a positive response to my message. Communion was kind of a messy affair. We carried the bread and wine around to the 15 or so congregants. Some eagerly received the body and blood of Christ as if they had hungered and thirsted for it for a long time. Others shook their head no, and a few just stared vacantly in the distance, perhaps already in full communion with their Lord. 3 very elderly men were seated together at a plastic table at a far end of the hall, each slumped over in his wheelchair. I approached one of the gentlemen and, holding the silver paten containing the wafers in my hand, I said, "Sir, would you like to receive communion?" "Huh?" he replied, a little startled. "Would you like to have communion?" I asked again. No, he muttered, his hands and head trembling. I turned to the man beside him and started to ask if he would like communion, but then I saw that he and his companion at the table had already placed one cupped hand atop the other, and they had raised their eyes toward me in eager anticipation. I placed the wafer in the palms of the outstretched hands and heard one of the men mutter, "Amen." And then, as I turned to leave the table, the first man, the one who had earlier turned down my offer of communion, touched my arm and whispered, "Would it be all right if I changed my mind?" I nodded, yes, and I placed the bread in his palm. No one's face shone like the sun, and no one's clothes became dazzling white. But I knew, without the shadow of a doubt, that we were in the presence of the Holy. After communion, a few of us gathered around Lily, a woman who was wrapped in blankets and had a knit cap, a toboggan, pulled so low on her head that her face was almost concealed. During most of the service, Lily's head rested on her chest, so that she seemed to disappear in her bundle of blankets. Occasionally she would raise her head, and like the ancient giant turtles of the Galapagos Islands, an alien-like face would emerge from a shell, and she would turn her head from side to side. Her eyelids would part, revealing a pair of pale, glassy eyes, seemingly discovering the world for the first time. One of our parishioners, Leslie, had brought her registered therapy dog, Jake, with her to visit the residents. Jake is a Bedlington Terrier, a beautiful animal that looks and feels more like a lamb than a real dog. Leslie held Jake close to Lily, allowing the side of Lily's wrinkled hand to brush Jake's lamb-like coat. Sensing something different, Lily's head rose from the folds of her blanket and her hands reached for the dog. Unable to speak, barely able to see or hear, Lily's sense of touch apparently remained intact. Lily's mouth opened to a wide, toothless grin, and she held Jake in her arms, experiencing more pleasure than she may have known in years. I noticed no bright clouds gathering or thundering proclamations from above. But on a cloudy winter afternoon in a shabby nursing home, we found ourselves in the presence of the holy. Echoing the prophetic message we heard this morning in 2 Peter, you will do well to be attentive to this as to a lamp shining in a dark place. The season of Lent is almost upon us. You may decide to give something up or take something on. My suggestion is that instead you take what you already have and make it holy. To use the season of Lent to open your eyes to the experience of divine presence, to the sense of awe that abounds within the ordinary. May you find within the 40 days that, as Peter said to Jesus, it is good for us to be